So we can just continue our discussion of the Bendowa, the section of it that we're talking about, the Jijuyu Zanmai section of Bendowa. And we are spending quite a bit of time on this one section where he starts really talking about the mutual assistance between the person sitting and all things in Zazen. So I'll read that again. I'll read this section again. In fact, I'll just read this second part of it. It's very short. Therefore, this Zazen person, without fail, drops off body and mind, cuts away previous tainted views and thoughts, awakens genuine Buddha Dharma, and he actually keeps going on from there. But I wanted to keep focusing on this part where he talks about dropping off body and mind and cutting away previous views. So we talked quite a bit about this already, about dropping off body and mind and what it means, in Dogen Zenji's teaching and how it fits into, the teachings of the Buddha too. We talked about this quite a bit last week and the week before. Last week we talked about, specifically the 6 coverings, and we had talked about the 5 desires before that. We talked about that in, the context of the 12-fold chain and how, that fits into the Buddha's teaching. So I wanted to kind of continue with that, that kind of theme of seeing what this means in the context of what the Buddha actually taught. So this next part here, cuts away tainted views and thoughts. So in our Zazen, we cut away previous tainted views and thoughts. So the first thing that's kind of interesting, to me, is he says, what is this cutting away? So he doesn't say we destroy them or we, eliminate them, but we cut off tainted views. So, we'll talk about tainted views, but what that actually means. But I think we all basically understand this wrong view in the Buddha's teaching. Ignorance, misunderstanding of self and other, the thing that creates the subject-object relationship, the things that causes the investment in ourselves as opposed to others. So we'll talk about all those things. But, this point just kind of struck me that, cutting it off is important, because in our Zazen practice, we're really just here and now, of course. We're not clinging to the past, or we're not looking forward into the future, as I always say. So really our suffering is really rooted in this investment in past and future. And so that's why so much of Dogen Zenji's teaching is about time, why that's such an important part of Dogen Zenji's teaching. And that's the essential point of the Buddha's teaching too, of course, is time and impermanence, what this reality really means in our life, and how we misunderstand it, and how we cling to it and make it into something that causes suffering, conceptual thing. So, this word that he uses in the Japanese, I can't read the original, of course, but I looked up the words, I investigated the words in my teacher's translation, and these words are like, it's pretty straightforward. an informed view, but this, Shiryo is the word I think that's translated as thinking, as thoughts or thinking. And this word, appears in Fukan Zazengi, or beyond thinking, Hishiryo. So it's, very important, of course, in studying Dogen's teaching in Buddhism. And this, the Buddhist dictionary that I looked at said that, this Japanese word has the kind of a connotation to be associated with manas, consciousness, in Yogacara Buddhism. So that is basically the thing that, clings to our experience, and the seeds of our experience as self. It's the thing that kind of processes all of our experience into some diluted, some wrong view, of self. So he's talking about here, basically from another perspective of going beyond this self, this investment, this reification, this process of self. So one way we can talk about this is, let's see. So, one way we can talk about this is that, we can talk about it in terms of views. As I've talked about this before, in Buddhism, there are sort of 4 types of clinging traditionally. And one of them is, clinging to views. And it's very clear that the Buddha said that this is a root source of suffering. Another one is clinging to this kind of I making, this I view. So really, I think that is the source of all of our other views. The clinging of all of our other views is clinging to this identity. I think we're really talking about the identity of self as opposed to other. And it's the investment in this thing that creates all of these other problems that we've already talked about before, described, this subject-object relationship, for example, that the Buddha said that inherently contains greed, hatred, and delusion. Once the object of the sense organ meets that sense organ, this contact creates some consciousness in which the greed, hatred, and delusion is inherent there. So the subject of that, of course, we think of as the self. We identify that sense object, one of the 5 skandhas, part of that process, as the self. So just talk about this from, just read a little bit about this kind of investment in views, or investment in, self in this way, from the Sutta Nipata, which is one of the earliest Buddhist texts. As far as, one of the scholars think it's probably the earliest, one of the earliest recorded sayings of the Buddha, that along with the Dhammapada. So those kind of 2 texts are very just sort of root texts to really have the fundamental point of what the Buddha is saying, explicit, I think. So this part here, he says, he's describing a person who is awake, who is awoken, who has awoken to reality. And he says, having abandoned what is taken up, not clinging, one does not create a dependency even on knowledge, not taking sides among those who are divided. One does not fall back on any view at all. So let me read that again. He says, having abandoned what is taken up, not clinging, one does not create a dependency even on knowledge. Not taking sides among those who are divided, one does not fall back on any view at all. So, it's kind of something we really don't understand. What is this not taking a view at all, not taking a view of self and other? How is this possible? What does it mean? From also in the Sutta Nipata, there's another part that I really like to quote too, that gives us a sort of insight into what that means. He says, one should not construct any view in the world by means of knowledge or good behavior and observances. One should not take oneself as equal or think of oneself as inferior or superior to others. So, I talk about this pretty often, but what does that mean if we're not considering ourselves superior or inferior or equal? It seems like all the options are gone. So in other words, he's saying we're not making a comparison at all to others. In fact, we're seeing, the way that we would say it in Dogen Zenji's teaching in Zen is that everything we encounter is our life. We're not talking about seeing an other when we encounter someone. This is the very early teaching of the Buddha. And that's part of what Jijuyu Zanmai means, that everything I encounter is my life, is the self, and I'm not setting up a comparison between myself and what I encounter, because I'm the only one who can experience my life. No one else is in this particular body and mind. I cannot say that there's anything that ultimately exists outside of my experience. And so everything I encounter is conditioning me, or is me. So once we buy into this view of the self and other through time, we're creating a conceptual reality and using that as our yardstick to live by rather than what we actually encounter. So in this moment of Zazen, that's why we're not clinging to past, we're not clinging to the future. Just here and now, we're sort of cleansed of this comparison between self and other through time, So clinging always involves something going into the past or something going into the future. Or it's really craving. Craving is the link right before clinging. And in the Four Noble Truths, the Buddha says that craving is really the problem. So we crave something from the past, or we compare ourselves or this particular experience to something that we experienced in the past, or we crave something in the future that's better than what's happening, here right now. And we cling to that. We cling to that craving as self, or the subject of that clinging as self. So So all of these, as I said, this kind of root view that creates all the problems is this view of self, this I making this view of me as opposed to you. And so, but how do we do anything in this world, or how do we, if we can't have some kind of view, how do we do anything in this world? How do we move through this life at all without any view? So the Buddha never said there was no view. He talked about right view, of course. Right view is is part of the Eightfold Path. So in some teachings, I think in some, especially teachings of the Buddha's day, the ascetics or the practitioners kind of really went for this state of no view, no experience, or no complete non-self. But yet the Buddha said that there is right view. And I talk about this often, this sutta, the Kaccayana Sutta, where he explains, what right view is. This is one of the ways that he explained what right view is. And so in this, I'll go ahead and read it again because it's very short. But this is directly related, to our Zazen, I think. So this person, Kaccayana, asks the Buddha, what is right view? And the Buddha says, the world in general, Kaccayana, is inclined to two views. And these are really views of the self, or views of our experience, views of the world. They're inclined to two views, to existence or to non-existence. But for him who, with the highest wisdom, sees the uprising of the world as it really is, non-existence of the world does not apply. And for him who, with the highest wisdom, sees the passing away of the world as it really is, existence of the world does not apply. The world in general, Kaccayana, grasps after systems and is imprisoned by dogmas. But he does not go along with that system grasping, that mental obstinacy and dogmatic bias. He does not grasp it, does not affirm, this is myself. He knows without doubt or hesitation that whatever arises is merely suffering, that what passes away is merely suffering, and such knowledge is his own, not dependent on anyone else. This, Kaccayana, is what constitutes right view. Everything exists, that is one extreme. Nothing exists, that is another extreme. Avoiding both streams, the Tathagata teaches the teaching of the middle. And then he talks about dependent origination here. So, how is this view of existence beyond existence and non-existence? The existence of the self, us here as people interacting, we see this arising. We have this experience of self. But if we, when we really investigate in that experience of self, we can't find anything permanent. We can't find anything that we can really define as me. When I say that, well, what I am is, a 60-year-old man. So I'm not going to be 60 years old much longer. And even the term man has only meaning when it's compared to something else. And beyond that, at some point, I see my life. I see that at one point I was a boy, and I see that at some point in the future I will not be a man anymore because I won't be alive. So, and any of these things that define what a man is or what a person is, of course, when we really look into them, we see that they're always changing and they're always connected to something else. So the only way this right view really manifests is just to be here now in this person that's, we say is 60 years old, but now is 1 or 2 seconds, 3, 4, 5 seconds older than he was just a moment ago. That this mind is always changing and flowing and different, and what I said 1 minute ago is past, and what I'm going to say in the future hasn't come yet, and as it does manifest, it's already gone. So this kind of ungraspable moment of the here and now is the only way that we really have this right view of self. So we see it arising, and we don't get stuck in this view that nothing matters, that it doesn't exist, that I don't have to really do anything now. There's no reason to even give this talk because no one exists, including myself, or there's nothing to care about. So why give a talk? Why be concerned about anyone else in the future, or whether they know the Dharma or not? And yet, at the same time, just as I'm speaking, I hear and feel and see this self, changing and slipping through my fingers, and I know that it will someday be gone. So the medicine for each of these views of either clinging to some dogmatic view of me as existent and the Dharma as true throughout all time, is this medicine of just simply being here in this moment of change. So, I think that's basically what Dogen Zenji is saying. Our zazen is in this way, in right view, cutting off tainted views, these views of either existence or non-existence, self and other, subject and object. And it's it's really our investment in identity that causes us so much suffering. We see it today more than more than any time in my lifetime. I've seen it where this kind of investment in identity is really based on an opposition to someone else's identity we think of. And this identity is okay, and that one is no good. And so I have to fight to get my way of seeing the world out there or preserved, or to dominate some other way of seeing the world. And this is the kind of thing that causes all kinds of conflict, strife, pain, and suffering for ourselves and for others. When I was it's always interesting to go to these meetings in a way, because it's one time that I just always wear, Zen monk's clothing, and I don't necessarily do it in Northwest Arkansas all the time because it feels like it's just maybe not so appropriate. And especially when I first got here, I felt like it could just cause more of a sense of separation for people rather than what I think the reason we really wear this kind of clothing is to relinquish, this sense of separation or this sense of us and them or me as opposed to you. But in certain circumstances, I think that may not be the case, where there can actually be some sense of misunderstanding and separation if something seems too exotic or seems too different, to people. So we have to kind of gauge in each situation what's appropriate. But, the way that we feel about ourselves and the way that we identify is really caught up in what we wear more than what we really realize, I think. And of course, in monastic traditions, it's a big reason, I think. There's an institutional reason too, but there's a reason that people dress the same or they dress a certain way when they become, a monastic or a monk. And so, walking around in monk's clothing, and I feel there's some projection within the mind about what others are thinking about me. And there's some way that I feel differently about how I'm presenting myself, through the world. So walking through an airport and seeing people look at me in a certain way because I'm dressed a certain way. It's a real concrete thing within the mind. And yet, when I get into another situation, I change clothing and, it's a completely different feeling. So Uchamaroshi used this metaphor a lot. My teacher uses it a lot, that we're born into this world, naked and penniless, and we die naked and penniless. Actually, Uchamaroshi that's a quote from Rousseau, the French philosopher. And he said, sometimes we put on the clothing of a father or of a mother or of a monk or of a lawyer, or sometimes, when we're interacting with someone in a store, we're the customer. When we're interacting with people in a situation like this, we're either the person listening to the talk or we're the person giving the talk. But when we die, we take off all of that clothing. We don't have any clothing when we're born, and we don't have any when we die. And he said, Sawaki Roshi said that the self that manifests in Zazen is the naked self, the self that doesn't compare and wear any of this clothing. So, the question is how do we somehow allow this naked self to be with us, in our interactions off of the cushion too, even though we have to wear the clothing and we have to interact with other people in a certain role. How do we, on the deepest level, of our interaction, manifest or be or encounter this naked self? It's another way of saying Jijuyu Zanmai. I think this naked self, everything I encounter is my life. Everything I encounter is self. So let's see if there's anything else I really wanted to say about this today. Anything that I've forgotten. I think that's about it. I think that's all I'm going to say about this today. So, does anybody have any comments? Anything anyone wanted to say today? Yoho had something.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, I don't usually wear these. So as you were talking, I think what made more sense now, and it seems kind of like a no-brainer now, or is that Zazen really is that the middle way, like, because we're not doing something, but we're not doing nothing, and it's just this perfect expression of the middle way, like kind of. And it also reminded me or made me think of, when Buddha held up, the flower and turned it, and obviously we all know, what happened, but it wasn't saying nothing, it wasn't silence, and it wasn't talking. So it was kind of again an expression, the middle, like again just an expression of the middle way. So it's like that all kind of synced up as you were talking. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for that. Yeah, it's really this middle way between, it's the way beyond doer and being done. So as you were saying, like in practice, we have to make some effort. And, the Buddha held up the flower and there was something done. And yet the reality itself is what the point of that koan, I think, is really the reality itself. The Buddha was manifesting the reality, itself in that flower. That's one way we can talk about it. So the flower was kind of giving the Dharma talk, this going beyond the reality and what we say about it and what we think about it and what, how we cook it up in our minds and separate it out and think that we have it, So, but unless we do some practice in order to let go, we are caught up in our thinking. We are caught up in the self. That's kind of our default mode in consciousness, for better or worse. That's that's what human consciousness does. Is it separates and it says this is black and this is white, and so we need to make some effort, and yet the effort is to do nothing. So the reality itself is the thing that heals us. This reality before we cut it up and say this is black and this is white. And so it's the reality beyond individual or universal self. So we're doing Zazen, but Zazen is doing us. So I think that's Dogen Zenji's one of his really primary points, that practice is enlightenment. When we give up in the moment, enlightenment manifests as the reality itself. But if we don't practice, we stay stuck in our own suffering. So it's not as if we just don't have to do anything. So when we encounter someone, there's we encounter someone and we endeavor to completely embrace them as self, but unless we make some effort to actually hear and be present and focus on that person, we can't receive that manifestation of reality. So unless there's some practice, there isn't that boundary between the self and all things is still there. So it's this reality beyond self and other, reality and the individual. I have said something.
Yeah, I think you mentioned, I don't know if it is Buddha saying in one of the sutras or somewhere that we shouldn't treat ourselves as superior to others or inferior to others or equal to others. So essentially, like not comparing or no comparison. So by like our human nature, we compare, right? We somebody drops off body mind or somebody gets enlightened. Still, how can they forget about this? Like they used to compare before, and that mind is still there, right? The comparison still comes up. Let's say when they see someone superior or inferior, or right, that comparison still comes up. When we are being asked not to do that, that seems ignoring this this thing that is also true, that's coming up. How are we supposed to practice that?
Yeah, well, it's a very good question, of course. So I think the key is really that we remember that we're naked. We have to manifest this naked self within those relationships. So, if we stay in that realm of non-comparison, complete non-comparison, that's a kind of nihilism. So the Buddha said, if we stay in that camp of everything is impermanent, everything is always changing, and so there's nothing that we can grasp onto, we have a kind of nihilism, And so he said the medicine for that is seeing the arising of things, seeing the arising of cause and effect, seeing how our thoughts and emotions and suffering arise. And so we make the comparisons in order to practice. So once we know something about our own mind, for example, what the difference between, our agitated mind and our angry mind and on our more peaceful mind, we can make some kind of, effort to reduce our own suffering and the suffering of others. But if we think that we always have to have a peaceful mind and say that is real, that is the only reality, then we create suffering, with that. Because a peaceful mind is impermanent. So the medicine for that is to see that no state of mind lasts forever. And that actually we become more peaceful when we understand that. So another way to say it is, when we encounter a person, we understand that they are self, and we don't say that we're better or worse than them, and that is our life. So that's the wisdom side. That's the wisdom side of our practice. That's the emptiness side. That everything I encounter is myself. Everything is worth care. Is my life. So everything is worth nurturing. So from that place, that everything I encounter is me, there arises the nurturing mind, the mind of compassion. So, wisdom and compassion are completely intertwined. Once we really understand the nature of emptiness, then, we understand some effort to nurture our life, some need or some desire, to nurture our life, and the life of others arises. So when I really encounter you as the self, there's some way that these comparisons are naked. We're naked under those comparisons, and we allow ourselves to make an effort to connect because of that sort of superficial difference. So in other words, Mahesh is from a different culture than I am. You grew up in a different culture. But on one level, we're completely 100% living the same life. We're both human beings. We both breathe air. We both, have to eat. We both have interactions with other people, and we have joy and we have sorrow. We're living a human life. And so on some level, there's no difference between us. But when we're having this discussion, or when we're having a discussion about, our how to understand one another, we provisionally will say, well, Mahesh was from one culture, and I'm from a different culture. Mahesh is a certain age. He experienced certain things at a certain age. I experienced certain things at a different age. In order for us to understand one another, we provisionally say we're different. And that is because that arises from the compassion or the understanding that we're not different. That, we're willing to make this kind of mistake, or, we're willing to say, I see you, I see that you don't have the same view that I do, So, once we start finding ourselves caught in that comparison mode, then the arising of impermanence, or the understanding of emptiness, is the medicine for that. So once we ever find ourselves saying, that guy, I really am better than him, or he really is better than me, then we allow the teachings of impermanence or emptiness to give us the medicine for that. So once we start saying, well, we're all one, so none of this doesn't really matter. I don't really need to know your point of view. I don't really need to pay attention. I don't really need to connect with you, because we're all going to die, and what does it matter? The world's going to blow up in a few million years, or whatever our way of viewing things, or whatever our excuse is for not caring. Then the teaching of cause and effect difference is the medicine. But the reality itself is both and neither of these, beyond these things. So, in other words, it's our zazen. So we just practice. I encounter you, and I make the notes of the differences, but I'm somewhere in my heart and mind, I know that we're all naked, beneath those. So it's being able to take our ultimate refuge in zazen, I think. So you can, if there's something else you want me to say about that, go ahead, but I probably should stop talking before it's too late. You're welcome. Okay, Lacey had something?
Yeah, now with everything that you've already said today, I kind of feel like you've already answered my question, but I'm still curious about what you would say about it. So, you say a lot of things like everything I encounter is me, and when we encounter someone, we embrace them as self. So the way it's stated, it seems like it revolves a lot around identity, possibly. So I was wondering if you could say anything about, or if there's anything missing in saying it a different way, just for the sake of not saying it in a different way because like it's wrong the first time, but just saying it in a different way to see if it's helpful in any way. But so I'm sorry, my question is like saying it in a different way that's not identity, but maybe more like responsibility. Like if we think about how we encounter somebody and how our actions are going to affect that encounter, and those actions of ours would be our karma, and it's our responsibility. Do you have anything to say about that? Sorry, it's such a convoluted question.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think that it's, I don't think really we're talking about identity. The word self, of course, brings up the image or the feeling or, our tendency to identify. But I think it's really what we're talking about is, letting go of this kind of identity between self and other, and to express it is difficult. It's very difficult. So you can say it in a positive way, or you can say it in a sort of negative way, or you can just say nothing at all. I think in early Buddhism, the Buddha really, sort of stressed a negative, the sort of non-self teaching. He stressed that, but he never said there's no self, or he never said, of course, that we shouldn't take care of others, or that there's some realm where nothing exists. So I think, that's what this sutta is saying. But, Mahayana Buddhism started expressing it in a more positive way, and taking it beyond, the kind of individual self into the self, beyond that, beyond the individual person. So these teachings like Indra's Net, or this, what my teacher says, the network of interdependent origination. It's a kind of way of saying it in a more, more positive way. But really, any of those ways are limited. And so we could say, non-self. We could just say, everything is non-self. It's another way we could say. So, but I think the part about responsibility or identity, or non-identity is there, in the Buddha's teaching, like of that Kaccayana Sutta. That's sort of the point. On one side, we have cause and effect. On the other side, you have impermanence. And so, you can talk about, I think, cause and effect as a sort of responsibility for ourselves and for others. We are responsible for our actions, of course, and what we do affects ourselves and affects others. And so we have to take responsibility for this moment and for the last moment and for future moments. So it's definitely a way that we can talk about that. On the other side, it's like, well, everything is always changing, and this self, what self is there that endures through time, to take the responsibility? That's the other perspective. So, when we take either one of those sides, we have a problem. If you say, well, it's really just about taking responsibility, then we kind of get stuck in enduring self and an ultimate truth, an ultimate reality that we start defending as self, or we start defending as a doctrine, or, something substantial. And so the medicine for that is impermanence and change. But if we stay in that camp, we have a problem too, which is, of course, if we're stuck there, that's what they call Zen sickness, the emptiness sickness, where nothing matters. I don't have any responsibility, and since everything is always changing, it doesn't matter. Nothing matters. But so that's why the problem is the reality doesn't fit neatly into either one of those sides. But that's the delusion of the human mind, that it will. That's why we're the primary reason. One of the primary reasons that we're deluded is that consciousness doesn't like ambiguity, or doesn't like wants to know yes or no. It's a binary system. As a reality is not a binary system, So we really don't understand in our mind how we can have responsibility, even though there is no person here. We say we do, but we really don't. But in experience, we understand it if we settle down into it. I think that's kind of the point. If we're not living up here and just taking care of this moment, it's okay, but when we start living in our mind, we have a problem, and we start attending to those things in our mind rather than what's actually in front of us. But, without using the mind, we have no compassion. So just as this is what I was saying to, Mahesh a minute ago, without concepts, there's no compassion either. Unless I actually recognize that you are a separate person, even though it's a complete fiction that it's really created in the mind, there's no way to offer anything to you, or see your point of view, or expand my own view, if we really just say everything is self and don't really understand what that means, there's no, compassion. All of the Buddha's teaching are compassion. The whole thing of him teaching about dependent origination, all of those things. I mean, it's their ideas and concepts that he offered to us out of compassion. He didn't have to do it. He could have just hung out and been released from his own suffering. But I think the point is that once we really understand that, then compassion arises. I mean, he really couldn't do anything else but offer the teachings, because he was a mature human being. He wouldn't have been the Buddha if he hadn't taught. He wouldn't have been an awakened person if he hadn't taught, I think is the point. Even though teaching is a kind of delusion and it's kind of a mistake, so we need to be deluded to be awake. It's another dichotomy, a contradiction that it doesn't work philosophically or intellectually, but in reality, it's just, the reality of life. So, the problem is that we get stuck with these views and we really start making them into idols, and we start, worshiping them and following them rather than the reality that is before us, or that they are supposed to be representing. But I mean, it's always a good point to remember that whatever we say is a kind of a lie, a mistake. So everything is self is kind of a mistake. Everything is not self is a mistake. And to not say anything else at all is also a mistake. So, that's kind of the point of a lot of those old koans, Everything is a mistake, but if you don't do anything, that's a mistake too. So what are you going to do? What are you going to say?